The Battle of Midway has long been remembered as a decisive American victory and a dramatic turning point in World War II. Yet this reputation often obscures how perilously close the United States came to catastrophic defeat, because in early June 1942 the balance of power in the Pacific still favored Japan, and the American Navy entered the battle weakened, inexperienced, and burdened by flawed doctrine, unreliable equipment, and immense strategic risk. Only 6 months had passed since the shock of Pearl Harbor, and although the United States had begun to mobilize its vast industrial capacity, that power had not yet translated into operational strength at sea, leaving the Pacific Fleet dangerously thin. The battleship force lay crippled, aircraft production was still ramping up, and carrier warfare, which would define the Pacific conflict, remained a largely untested art for American commanders. Against this fragile backdrop, Japan stood at the height of its military confidence, having swept through Southeast Asia, crushed Allied naval resistance, and established a defensive perimeter designed to protect its newly conquered empire. Admiral Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, understood that Japan could not win a prolonged war against the industrial might of the United States, and so he sought a decisive engagement that would destroy the remaining American carrier force and force Washington into a negotiated peace. Midway Atoll, a small but strategically vital outpost northwest of Hawaii, became the focal point of this plan, serving as bait in a carefully constructed trap meant to lure American carriers into annihilation. From the American perspective, the defense of Midway represented both an opportunity and a gamble because while the atoll was critical to the protection of Hawaii, committing the Pacific Fleet's limited carrier strength risked everything the United States had left in the region. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, faced an agonizing choice: allow Japan to seize Midway and threaten Hawaii directly, or concentrate his vulnerable carriers in a desperate attempt to ambush a superior enemy force. The decision was shaped by intelligence breakthroughs achieved by American cryptanalysts, who had partially broken Japan's naval code and identified Midway as the target of an imminent Japanese operation. This intelligence advantage gave Nimitz a rare opportunity to act preemptively, positioning his carriers northeast of Midway to strike first, yet the information was incomplete and uncertain, and a misinterpretation could have led American forces straight into destruction. Even with forewarning, the odds remained grim because Japan committed 4 fleet carriers supported by battleships, cruisers, submarines, and invasion forces, while the United States could muster only 3 carriers, one of which USS Yorktown had been badly damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea and was only hurriedly repaired in an extraordinary effort that masked its underlying fragility. As the battle unfolded on June 4, 1942, the gap between planning and reality became brutally clear, revealing just how close the United States came to failure. Japanese aircraft launched an early morning strike against Midway Island, inflicting damage but failing to neutralize its airfields, prompting Japanese commanders to consider a second attack. At the same time, incomplete reconnaissance reports suggested the possible presence of American naval forces plunging Admiral Kiichi, Nagumo, commander of the Japanese carrier strike force, into a paralyzing dilemma over whether to prepare his aircraft for land attack or anti-ship operations. This moment of indecision, often cited as a turning point, highlights how the battle hinged on timing and uncertainty rather than overwhelming force. While Japanese carriers cycled aircraft through their hangars, rearming and refueling in accordance with doctrine that emphasized perfectly coordinated strikes, American aircraft from Midway and the carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, began launching a series of poorly coordinated attacks that exposed severe weaknesses in American doctrine. Torpedo squadrons flew slow, lightly armored aircraft directly into the teeth of Japanese defenses without adequate fighter escort, suffering devastating losses and achieving little immediate success, and at face value these attacks appeared wasteful and ineffective, reinforcing the impression that American forces were outmatched and disorganized. Yet beneath this apparent failure lay a fragile chain of unintended consequences that would ultimately shape the battle's outcome. The repeated torpedo attacks forced Japanese fighters to remain at low altitude, expending fuel and ammunition while disrupting the timing of Japanese operations. And this relentless pressure contributed to the momentary vulnerability of the Japanese carriers at precisely the wrong time. Even so, American success was far from assured, because the dive bombers that would later deliver the decisive blows nearly failed to find their targets at all. Navigational errors, poor communication, and fuel constraints scattered American squadrons across vast stretches of ocean, And it was only through a combination of individual initiative and chance sightings that they converged on the Japanese fleet. When they finally arrived overhead, the Japanese carriers were at their most vulnerable, with aircraft on deck and munitions stacked below, and in a matter of minutes, 3 carriers were struck and fatally damaged. This dramatic reversal has often been portrayed as inevitable, yet in reality, it was the product of extraordinary luck layered atop courage and sacrifice because, had the timing been even slightly different, American aircraft might have been intercepted or missed the fleet entirely. Even after this stunning success, the United States stood on the edge of disaster because the Japanese carrier Hiryu remained operational and launched a series of counterattacks that severely damaged USS Yorktown, temporarily removing it from action and convincing Japanese commanders that they had sunk multiple American carriers. Yorktown's survival, though brief, depended on exceptional damage control efforts that restored power and flight operations under extreme conditions. And this resilience masked the precariousness of the American position, because the loss of even one carrier significantly weakened American striking power. When Yorktown was later torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and eventually sank, it underscored how narrow the American margin truly was. Because had Japanese forces been able to destroy the remaining carriers, as well, the Pacific Fleet would have been left unable to contest Japanese control of the Central Pacific for an extended period. The reasons the United States almost lost at Midway extend beyond individual decisions and moments of chance, reaching into deeper structural weaknesses that plagued the American Navy at the time. Carrier warfare doctrine was still evolving, inter-service coordination was inadequate, and equipment limitations, including faulty torpedoes and outdated aircraft, imposed severe constraints on tactical effectiveness. American pilots were brave and determined, but many lacked combat experience, and their training had not fully prepared them for the complexities of large-scale carrier engagements. Intelligence, while decisive, was imperfect, and reliance on partially decrypted communications introduced significant risk, because a single incorrect assumption could have placed American carriers directly in the path of a superior enemy force. Strategic necessity forced American commanders to accept these risks. Yet necessity does not eliminate danger, and Midway remains a stark example of how close strategic gambling can come to disaster. From the Japanese perspective, the battle exposed fatal flaws rooted in overconfidence and doctrinal rigidity. Early victories had reinforced the belief that superior training and spirit could overcome material limitations, leading to plans that assumed perfect execution and underestimated enemy resilience. Yamamoto's decision to divide his forces across vast distances weakened mutual support and reduced flexibility, while strict adherence to doctrine limited commanders' ability to adapt rapidly to unexpected developments. The failure of reconnaissance, the hesitation over aircraft armament, and the inability to respond decisively to unfolding threats combined to produce a catastrophic outcome that Japanese forces were ill-equipped to recover from. The loss of 4 fleet carriers and their experienced aircrews represented not just a material defeat, but the destruction of a professional corps that could not be replaced at the pace required by a prolonged war against a rapidly mobilizing United States. In the aftermath of Midway, the United States emerged with a clearer understanding of both its vulnerabilities and its potential, and this awareness drove sweeping changes in training, tactics, and command that would eventually produce overwhelming superiority. Yet these reforms were born from the recognition that victory at Midway had not been guaranteed, and that the line between triumph and catastrophe had been dangerously thin. The battle stands as a reminder that historical turning points are often shaped by uncertainty, improvisation, and sacrifice rather than inevitability, and that the outcomes later celebrated as decisive were once balanced on moments of confusion and fear. The United States almost lost the Battle of Midway because it fought from a position of weakness against a formidable enemy at the height of its power, and it survived only by exploiting a fleeting opportunity created by enemy miscalculation and human error. In this sense, Midway was not simply a victory but a narrow escape, a moment when history could have taken a far darker path, and a lesson in how fragile success can be when war is fought on the edge of uncertainty.